but wanted to go ahead and introduce our presentation. So this was definitely a collaborative effort of like all of us, and we will have each team be represented by one person for each graph to kind of like present to you all what we have found. And then if you have any questions about the resources or just our insights or our graphs or whatever, we'll be able to have like a little Q&A at the end here. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Aluchi.
Thanks, Alexa. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I just am going to give a brief overview of what we're going to be presenting on today, and then we'll transition into it from there. We'll start with an orientation to the data sets we're using, how we curated them, and the decisions that we made along the way. Veronica will speak to the data curation process on behalf of Alvin, Courtney, Kadir, Matt, Pete, and Stan, who kind of constituted our data validation team. We'll then give a high-level overview of the hospitals we identified in Nashville, as well as general Medicare referral volume trends that we're seeing in the Middle Tennessee area. Veronica, Savannah, and Maeva will be speaking to the overall landscape of Medicare referral practices in Middle Tennessee. We'll turn from there to look at clusters of providers in the area based on the Louvain community detection algorithm. Our Mel and Kadir will be speaking about the provider communities of Middle Tennessee based on their analyses alongside Daniel and Patty. Sorry, Daniel. Next, we'll ask if the provider communities we've identified translate to patient referrals and delve deeper into the distribution of patient referrals to Nashville hospitals by specialty and subspecialty. Matt P. and Taylor will be speaking on 2 visualizations that illustrate trends in hospital referrals by provider specialty. Then we'll dig deeper into areas of strength and areas of opportunity for VUMC to grow in the Middle Tennessee area. Here, Tony, Courtney, Matt P., Alvin, and Stan will be speaking on behalf of their team's work based on analyses completed alongside Matthew G. and Maggie. Sorry, y'all. Finally, we'll recap insights drawn from our class investigation into the Medicare referral data and suggest a few avenues for future research and analyses. And I will then be coming back in to talk through just some of the outcomes of our group project on behalf of the entire class. And then from there, we'll open it up for Q&A. So without further ado, we'll dive in and we'll start with Veronica's overview of methods.
Wonderful, thanks, Aluchi. So in terms of the data sets that we used, we pulled the HOP teaming data set from 2017 provided by CareSet. And that was a fairly large data set in the hundreds of millions of unique relationships between providers and individual healthcare providers and organizations, and between individual providers and individual providers. So what we did is we took that data set, we pared it down to look only at providers who are located within Nashville, the Nashville CBSA. So that's about 135 zip codes that really form encompass most of Middle Tennessee. We then pared it down even further to providers who were individual healthcare providers identified by their NPI code. And then we were looking at just referrals to general acute care hospitals in the Nashville area. So to give you a sense for the final data set that we were working with, it was significantly smaller than the total referrals recorded for Medicare patients in 2017. In some, we were looking at referrals to 25 general acute care hospitals in Nashville from about a little bit over 4,000 unique individual healthcare providers. This added up to about 1.4 million patients referred and about 1.9 million referral transactions in this data set. And so let's actually just go ahead and start looking at the healthcare landscape to see some of the insights that we were able to draw based on this data set. So looking at this map, we see that across the Middle Tennessee area, we mentioned that there are those 25 hospitals. And so here we see them sort of mapped out, and each of the dots is a different size based on their total patient referral count in this data set. In addition, we identified a number of hospital groups. So we actually will be looking both at the individual hospitals, so like TriStar Centennial, as well as a few analyses which actually look at things at the group level. So all of HCA, encompassing multiple hospitals for points of comparison. So Savannah is actually going to be up next to give us a sense for how hospital size and Medicare patient referral volumes correlate, and continue giving us this high-level overview and introduction to our analysis.
Thanks, Veronica. So when we were doing our analysis, a lot of what we were finding is that when we look at just pure numbers, Vanderbilt is really overwhelming the other hospitals just because it is so much larger. So we were looking for a metric we could use to kind of weight some of our data by hospital size. And we decided to use the most recent count for number of beds for each hospital. So number of staffed beds was kind of the metric we used to determine how large a hospital was. So this scatter plot here plots the number of hospital beds by the number of referrals each hospital is getting, and it provides a nice visual for which hospitals are getting, above average referrals per bed or below average. You can hover over the blue dots there, and you can see that, like, for example, Vanderbilt and St. Thomas West, they're getting above average referrals per bed. And then if you hover below the line, you might see names like, I think Centennial and St. Thomas Midtown. So we're not, exactly sure if this is just because the larger hospitals where people are hearing of them and ending up there, or if there's actually, anything going on behind the scenes. But this is just a nice metric to use to keep in mind, the size of the hospital compared to how many referrals they're getting. So we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper. I'm going to hand it over to Maeva, and he's going to explain this graph here.
Thank you, Savannah. So on this graph, we wanted to zoom out a little bit and see about how is the referral from patient count referrals from the specialties goes into the facility group. And I want to emphasize that this is facility group. This is not individual hospitals. The main thing that we see obviously there is that Vanderbilt owned all of the majority of the referrals, especially for internal medicine, nurse practitioner, psychiatry and neurology, and family medicine. It basically shows that a lot of the referrals is everyone get a small, some share of each pie. It's very diverse. It's not specifically that internal medicine is only for one specific group, but it's diverse for every part. Although I want to emphasize a little bit that on here, we noticed that family medicine and physician assistant is where HCA actually is leading before Vanderbilt. So definitely HCA group and Ascension St. Thomas groups are the biggest competitors of Vanderbilt here. Also, this graph shows you that the bar graph shows who is the highest one for each side of the graph. And next, I would like to pass it over to Veronica for the next analysis.
Can't find my unmute button. Okay, awesome. So as we just saw, looking at the provider to hospital flows in the Middle Tennessee area on aggregate shows like a huge diversity of Medicare patient referral practices. We also saw that not every hospital gets, there's a huge diversity, but that's also not necessarily always proportional number of referrals on aggregate from the scatter plot that Savannah shared. So could this be due to each institution's provider networks within Middle Tennessee? Now, to answer this question, Armel, Daniel, Kadir, Patty, and Tony modeled the Nashville hospital provider referrals using the Leuven community detection algorithm that Aluchi mentioned earlier. So Kadir will actually kick us off here by orienting us to some of the communities identified by the algorithm and explain how that algorithm works.
All right, thank you, Veronica. So here what we did with this community analysis is we took over 6,000 unique Nashville providers in general acute care hospitals and run the Leuven community detection algorithm over it. So basically we did the community cluster of providers. We identified cluster of providers along the hospital themselves. So looking at this plot, the x-axis are the hospitals, individual hospitals, and the y-axis is the patient count that goes to each hospital from the communities. And the colors, as you can see on the right side, is community. So that's a random number. It's not necessarily, doesn't have any meaning. So just may clarify there. So as you can see by the major colors in each bar plot, that each hospital lead their own park. Basically, they exist within their own community. You can see that the first plot, Vanderbilt's leads park. It gets all its almost all of its referrals from community 410. And also HCA, looking at HCA, they get their share from, I think it is 5, 6, 7, from a different community. Basically, essentially concluding that each hospital lead their own pack. The only hospital actually get a little bit more diverse from a different communities, a little bit vendor, relatively speaking. To walk us through the rest of the analysis, including the spatial distribution of the communities, Amila will be speaking next. All right, Amila, floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm here. All right, so here I look at the geographical distribution of provider communities. And if we take the provider communities generated by the Louvain community detection algorithm, we can use the zip code of the provider office locations to generate a heat map of the communities of Medicare recipients each hospital serves. So what you see here is a 3 map that represent the flow of referral per zip code for 3 major communities. And each community of provider interact with a specific acute care facility. So you have HCA, St. Thomas, and Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And as you can see, while HCA and HTI Memorial Hospital have the highest and broader referrals, I think you can appreciate that referrals hospital communities fall into geographic clusters. And this is very true for St. Thomas Hospital, as you can see in magenta. On this map, it's where you have the majority of referral. And for Vanderbilt University, it's very, very specific to where Vanderbilt University Medical Center is localized. It's a very tiny zip code. So you can barely see it, but it's very in the middle. And also another interesting point is that the same zip code cluster are found between communities. As you can see similar zip code, but it's at a different intensity in function of the hospital location. So in general, we can see that, as I said, provider hospital communities fall into geographic cluster, and the same zip code are represented across all 3 major hospital systems, and this has probably to do with medical recipients' geographic distribution. But the zip codes are served at different intensities. And I'm going to transition it to Oluchi.
Thank you so much, Armel and Kadir. So just as a recap, here we can see one way of thinking about Medicare referral networks between providers and hospitals in Middle Tennessee. Everything that we've shown is that, if nothing else, there seems to be at least some kind of a hint that there might be a relationship between certain providers and certain hospitals as well, or hospital communities, as well as location being a factor that matters. And we'll come back to this a little bit later when we talk about the UMC growth opportunities. In the next section, MAPKey will get us started in analyzing Medicare referral networks through a different lens. Rather than looking at algorithmically, defined communities, let's consider the Nashville healthscape through the lens of patient referral volume to start thinking about opportunity size for an individual hospital or a healthcare referral group to capture additional Medicare kind of referral market share. So on to you, Matt.
Yeah, so we're going to look at this visual twice. We're going to see it again later on down the road, where we'll dig into it a little bit deeper. So don't strain your eyes too much trying to read the tiny print here. We'll blow it up for you. Really what we're looking at here, so this is a visual, it's a tree map, of course, that shows a breakdown of referrals by classification, then specialization, and then the hospital group where patients are referred. So you can see this largest box in the left 2/3 or so is all internal medicine split up by specialization. We are looking to see if there is consistency with where patients are sent based on specialization, as in, is it a pretty even distribution across all hospitals for all specializations? And you definitely do see some patterns. Of course, HCA and Vanderbilt do tend to compete for the top position for everything. It's easy to see HCA sitting near the top left corner of everything. Vanderbilt's harder to see just because the print is so small, but it does compete for the top 2 or 3 in nearly every specialty, of course, with a few exceptions. I do want to point out just 2 things on this before we move on. First, as you see within internal medicine, there's a large none section. You won't see this very often just because we've excluded it for obvious purposes that it's hard to find trends with. But if you do look into providers with the specialization of none, you find that they actually do have specialties. You know, if you Google the names, they're cardiologists, they're family medicine. So for the purpose of looking at overall volume, I did include it here. You can't look at trends with it beyond just there are patients who are going to these hospitals. And I did want to go ahead and point out that there are, you know, I mentioned that HCA and Vanderbilt tend to dominate most categories, but of course there's outliers. So within cardiovascular disease, you see that Ascension and Williamson Medical Center don't just compete, they actually win out the most in the largest classification. So I'm going to look at this a little bit deeper later on, but for now, we're going to move on to Taylor, who's going to take a more specified look at these hospitals.
Yeah, so wanted to look at this in a different way. As you all saw, you know, Matt's tree map really effectively highlights how networks of hospitals can work in conjunction with one another. And so we wanted to dial it back a little bit and look at hospitals on an individual basis. So we utilized this stacked bar plot by specialty to show each individual hospital. And in terms of those individual hospitals, of course, Vanderbilt University Medical Center sticks out very much in regards to the number of referrals they're receiving by specialty. You know, you can also see that not only is it the just absolute largest, but within each specialty, but from just a raw count perspective, they're going to lead the pack in nearly every single category as well. Specifically out of those specialties of note, internal medicine shows up there in red, and also family medicine is going to be in purple there. And those are pretty consistent across the board from an individual hospital standpoint of the 2 specialties that really drive these referrals. At the bottom, you'll see Centennial Medical Center, which is an HCA hospital. And it's going to be the next largest with approximately about 75,000 referrals just on total when looking at all of the specialties. There we go. Yeah. But when comparing that to Vanderbilt as a whole, it's completely dwarfed. So with that, you can really sort of see the strength of Vanderbilt as an individual hospital, whereas the rest of these networks of hospitals really rely on one another from a referral standpoint. So from there, Luci's going to introduce the next part of our analysis.
Thank you so much, Taylor. So yeah, just to kind of recap again, here what we've seen is that these analyses by Matt and Taylor have aligned really closely with what we saw from Ava and Armel and just like previous presenters, just to kind of show that VUMC is one of the largest hospitals by Medicare per patient referral volume in Middle Tennessee. And it would seem that all specialties, for the most part, roughly proportionally referred to each hospital in the Middle Tennessee area. But then I guess that begs the question of what we're going to look into a little bit next is where are opportunities for VUMC to grow? So in this section, Alvin, Courtney, Matt, Pete, Tony, and Stan will dig into some opportunities for VMC to grow that they've identified alongside Matthew, Maggie, Savannah, and other members of their team. We'll revisit here the provider hospital communities with Tony and see how VU versus non-VU provider hospital communities compare across specialties. So we'll go on to you, Tony.
Thanks, Alochi. So we use the Louvain algorithm to create communities across the referral network based on patient count. If we look at the first chart here, we can see the 10 communities that the Louvain algorithm created, and it provides Vanderbilt and non-Vanderbilt breakdowns of the acute care hospitals here. As Savannah noted earlier, some of the institutional sizes here, it's probably an artifact. If we go to the second chart here, we can see the Vanderbilt, the count of referrals by specialty on the left, and then non-Vanderbilt referrals and the count there on the right. The size of the Middle Tennessee specialty provider communities, it generally aligns with the volume of the Medicare patient referrals, with the exception of nurse practitioners and a couple other things. Overall, the distribution of the patient referral volume looks roughly the same between Vanderbilt and these non-Vanderbilt institutions, with just a few small exceptions. And of course, those are like some of the more specialized types of medicine practiced at Vanderbilt. If you go to the third chart here, shows us sort of this is a percentage breakdown of Vanderbilt specialties on the left, and then the specialty as a whole in the region and what it is a percentage of all referrals. So at a strategic level, it's useful to compare these. You can see Vanderbilt's area of strength against the entire regions sort of as a whole. We see, for instance, Vanderbilt has a particularly large market share for ophthalmology and otolaryngology. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that 100% correctly. Psychiatry is another interesting one we found in here. It's coded differently depending on the hospital. So it's under general acute care under Vanderbilt, but it's not for some of the other hospitals there. If we look at the chart there on the right, though, we can see that some of the smallest in total number of providers within the Vanderbilt community are far outstripped by internal medicine. It's important to note that in these findings, we have these numbers of total referral count and total percentage count, but we don't necessarily have like a baseline metric. Like if we're trying to look at what referral networks Vanderbilt might try to target, that's important to look at, but also it might be worth looking at what we want to target in the first place, right? We don't have necessarily capacity numbers for the 3 Vanderbilt hospitals, right? I think Vanderbilt has 48% of dermatology referrals in the entire area. Are they at half capacity, or is that 150% capacity of what they can handle, right? So it would be worth noting that you might not want to target areas where your institution's already at full capacity. We don't have this like baseline metric to sort of look at and see how well each specialty is performing, if that's one way to look at it, rather. I'm going to hand it over to Courtney and Matt, and they're going to dive deeper into Vanderbilt's growth opportunities and examine the strengths of Vanderbilt's current Medicare referral pipeline, as well as the market opportunities for Vanderbilt to grow through the lens of patient referral volume.
Yeah, so like I said, we are going to look at these tree maps again. And I have 2 right here. Alexa, we're going to bounce back and forth between them, just a heads up. So this top one, the first one, the breakdown, like the pathway for this tree map is the outer box is an HC, or is the hospital group, which feeds down to classification, which feeds down to specialization, which of course is just like a subgroup of classification. On the second visual, the parents box is going to be the classification that works its way down to the hospital. All right. So let's bounce up to the first one. So what we're looking for here is areas where Vanderbilt is already strong. So these are, where is Vanderbilt doing well? On this, we can go ahead and see Well, so what I've done with this is I've broken that into 2 categories. So Vanderbilt is doing well, and they've already cornered the market. There's no room for growth. The second category would be Vanderbilt is doing well. They already have structures in place to do this specialization, and there's room to continue growing in the market. So we're gonna first look at where those cornered markets are. So the first one that we're gonna look at is acute care. So that's within the nurse practitioners, there's acute care. You can see Vanderbilt has a pretty large chunk of that. And then the second one that we'll look at is ophthalmology. And where is that? There, it's going to be down the bottom center. So those are 2 areas where they currently make up a pretty large portion of what Vanderbilt does. So let's go down and see how those look in the city as a whole. So looking at acute care, let's see. It always moves around on the different screen that you're looking at. So it is in the nurse practitioner, I believe. Is that true? Here it is. So acute care, you can see in the middle section on the right, Vanderbilt already has over half of what's going on with acute care. So while there is room to grow, the overall volume of it is not hugely strong. The same can be said for ophthalmology. I'm not going to make us zoom around and find it. Oh, actually, it's right below nurse practitioner. Do you see it there in the, yeah. So here you can see that it's even more pronounced. Vanderbilt already has what, maybe 75% of the total acute care. So Vanderbilt's doing well. There's not a lot of room for it to grow. So let's not focus our resources there. Let's head back up to the top, the next one. Yeah. So here we're going to look at 3 different specializations where Vanderbilt is doing well and also has room to grow. Those 3 that we're going to look at are cardiovascular disease. Can you go and click into Vanderbilt for me? Hey. So cardiovascular disease, there you go. It's actually the largest thing that Vanderbilt gets referrals for. The second 2 are nephrology, which is on the left towards the bottom, as well as pulmonary disease. And there you go. So let's go look in the bottom graph and see where those show up overall. So cardiovascular disease, you see it's the top left. So while this made up Vanderbilt's largest set of referrals, there's a whole lot of room to grow in the city with cardiovascular disease. So I would definitely recommend that Vanderbilt looks into beefing that up a bit. Then we've also got nephrology and pulmonary disease. So those are the top 2 on the right. You can see here, HCA actually covers the highest of both. So Vanderbilt does have experience in this. We're not telling Vanderbilt you should get more patients in something that you don't have any existing operations for. There's room to grow and you already know how to do this. That's the extent of what I was going to look at with these 2. So I'm going to pass it on to Courtney.
Thanks, Matt. So as Matt was discussing, we spent a lot of time thinking about the areas of opportunity for growth in terms of the conditions that affect the patient population that Vanderbilt is serving here. So we looked at the top 20 chronic conditions that are posted by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. These are the conditions that most commonly affect Americans, and specifically the patient population that we have, which is people 65 and older. In this chart here, we have some exploration of subspecialties associated with 2 of these key conditions, including cardiac issues and respiratory disease. We focused in on these 2 fields because at a condition-based level, they showed that there's a lot of room for Vanderbilt to grow. So while we've seen in the previous visualizations that Vanderbilt has an extremely strong market presence and a lot of expertise in specializations, these are areas where there's still plenty of demand in the market and plenty of patients to be served. So Alexa, if you don't mind just double clicking on pulmonary disease position. Matt mentioned this in his tree map, but this gives us a very stark view of how HCA, Ascension St. Thomas, and Vanderbilt compare as the top 3 hospital systems for pulmonary disease referrals. So pulmonary disease is We hear a lot about COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, emphysema. There are high rates of comorbidity with other conditions like diabetes, obesity, and we also considered that in the coming years, there will probably be an increase of research and understanding of the long-term effects of COVID-19 in the pulmonary function of an aging population, even with people who may not have necessarily had a very severe case. And you can just, I think, click out of pulmonary disease and it should extract that one and then highlight the rest of them.
Oh, sorry. Which one are you trying to pick?
So if you just click on pulmonary once, it should remove that from the filter. Yeah, there we go. So here we have a couple subclassifications associated with cardiac issues grouped together. And when we combine these, we see that from a condition-based view, there is still room for Vanderbilt to grow in cardiac care. Matt mentioned that they had have a very strong cardiology department, which is true. But we looked at this more granular level because we felt like, especially with a provider like Vanderbilt, where they already have a strong market presence, looking at things at only a high level could mask those areas of incremental growth. And we see here like interventional cardiology care, vascular surgery. We see it tending towards things that are less invasive. So, in terms of more conservative treatments and early stage intervention, considering that 27% of Medicare recipients have some form of heart disease, this could be a great way for Vanderbilt to grow their revenue incrementally. We also considered the role of geography in public health patterns and would recommend that that's another area to look into in terms of targeting potential patients and referrers. And Alvin is going to talk to us now about growth opportunities driven by that geographic perspective.
Alexa, if you go back up to that line chart. Perfect. Thank you, Courtney. So I'll be expanding upon what Matt and Courtney's been already talking about. So this chart should look pretty familiar from a prior map that Savannah created earlier, where it had overall referrals related to patient hospital bed counts. However, we added another layer in terms of classification specialty. So one of the things that we noticed when analyzing the data with this is that and as the common theme goes, with internal medicine and family medicine, that Vanderbilt performed above average. So if you can click around to family medicine or internal medicine, that Vanderbilt falls kind of above the line when it comes to that. However, one of the things that we noticed is when we clicked on physician's assistants, you might have to, yeah, there we go, that Vanderbilt actually falls below the line. And we thought that was pretty interesting to visit a little, to dig in a little deeper. So if we stay on this, so we came up with a couple of hypotheses for these type of scenarios. And one is, it doesn't have a graph to it, but one possibility is, if alluding back to Kadir's and Tony's analysis of the network clusters and community network clusters that we're talking about, that a lot of the clusters related back to one hospital, that networks were tightly related to one hospital. So if you see one community, that it would be connected to a hospital with another community tightly related to another hospital. But when you cross-reference that to these things called ACOs, which are accountable care organizations, you see other hospitals in line with those referral patterns. So what that looks like, for example, like Vanderbilt Medical Group has Connected Care Middle Tennessee, which includes Vanderbilt, but Northcrest Physicians and Williamson Medical Center, but also includes like there other communities, includes the Accountable Care Coalition, Next Gen, and Ascension Care. So these hospital system communities are not just for the hospitals, but also highly correlated to the hospital systems that are part of these organizations. So with that being said, that kind of goes to show that why aren't physicians assistants, along with internal medicine and family medicine, referring in these same type of community patterns? Well, a possibility is that physicians assistantships are not aligned with these ACOs. But for the next hypothesis, And what we actually suggest, if you go down a little bit more, there we go. For the physicians referrals, what this map is showing us is plotting all of the physician's assistants locations by referral volume. And one of the things that you'll notice, which if you had the interactive version of this map, is as you go out from central Nashville, that volumes of physician's assistantships or physician's assistants referrals tend to go up. So volumes tend to be higher in more rural areas of the CBSA. And what that kind of goes to show is that, and if in the other map, if you go back up to the other map, Alexa, if you look at, or not the map, the thing, if you look at some of the other above the line, no, stay on that physician's assistants. And if you look at some of the points that have high levels of intro, a lot of these Maury County and then the Hendersonville TriStar Horizon are in the more rural parts of the communities. So with that being said, that one of the areas is, it's not just there's a proximity effect to it, but then there's also a tight network community cluster aspect to it. So our suggestion would be is, because of the proximal effect of being further away from Vanderbilt being more central and less away from rural, is for Vanderbilt Lebanon to particularly could probably penetrate these markets where physician's assistants are referring to. Again, this is only half of the picture, as this is just Medicare data and we don't have private insurance data, but that's a possibility that we can dig into. So the next thing that I'll be passing it on to is Stan, as we get even more granular with our analysis from going from the classification level more into the NPI and the individual provider level. So he will highlight some individual providers who are high volume Medicare patient referrals who do not have any referral relationships with Vanderbilt University.
Hi. So what we were looking at specifically here was physicians that were not sending any patients at all to Vanderbilt and strictly to competitors. Well, the vast majority of them were not hospitalists, but essentially like hospitalists. They were referring within their own network. So to kind of filter that out a little bit further, we pooled non-Vandy referring providers who have referred to either 2 or more hospital groups. So they would refer outside of their own. And this is what we found. These were the top 10 providers. Every single one of them is a cardiologist. Now that said, also the vast majority of them are with HCA, and most of their referrals are through HCA, but they have sent out to other facilities such as like Williamson County, as well as Murray. So that's what we found. And if they were willing to refer anyone to Vanderbilt outside of HCA network, these would be the ones the top 10 who'd be ripe for the picking. And now Matt will share a tool for identifying additional providers who are high volume referees with weak or non-existent Medicare patient referral relationships with Vanderbilt. Yeah, I'm back with another tree map, because as we've learned in this class, you just can't get enough tree maps. Like Stan said, this is just a tool that you can use to dig a little bit deeper and find some more providers. So here's what we're looking at. Again, we've got a tree map that's broken down by classification and specialization. And within that, we have providers who are within those. They are sized by the number of referrals to anybody but Vanderbilt. So to Vanderbilt's competitors. The color of each NPI box is the percent of patients going to competitors. So there were 2 parts of this. One was looking at which providers are sending exclusively to competitor hospitals. And the other question was, who is sending the most? So just like a quick call out, you can see in interventional cardiology, you got John Riddick right there. As we saw, that was Stan's top. So yay for us. We found the same thing. But I'm going to scoot back out of that and look into cardiovascular disease. We've mentioned a few times that this is going to be a specialization or a classification that Vanderbilt has some room for growth. So I'm just going to focus on this for the purpose of the presentation. I didn't say, and I want to say, it's really easy to look at this and find trends, and say, ooh, what can we discover from this visual? And you need to be really careful with this one. Don't run with it. Maybe it's just like take a light stroll. Because you got to keep in mind that there's a lot of information missing from this. For one thing, it's only showing referrals to Vanderbilt or to Vanderbilt's competitors. So you are not seeing the full market of this. So I just wanted to point that out before you get too excited. This really is just a tool to look at those NPIs. So like I said, answering two questions. One was which providers are sending fully to Vanderbilt's competitors. An example of that would be Tracy Callister. She is there, the second left, yeah. So you can see percent of competitors, 100%. And her total patients that she is referring is 2,542. The deal with Tracy Callister is, Stan had mentioned this, she probably works for a competitor hospital. There is not a great chance that you're gonna convince her to send some patients to Vanderbilt because she's already working full-time somewhere else. Now, in some specialties, you might be able to poach her entirely. You might be able to say, come over to Vanderbilt and take some of your patients with you. This might work with something like general medicine or some like long-lasting conditions. However, it's not going to work for everything. So, and I'm not saying that cardiovascular disease is something that would work for, but that is an option. If we want to look at providers who are referring a lot of patients to non-Vanderbilt, to Vanderbilt's competitors, but also sometimes do send to Vanderbilt. So you know that they don't hate Vanderbilt. We're gonna look for the larger, lighter color boxes. So look at Adam Prudoff. He's there toward the top right, yeah. So you can see here, he sends 44% of his patients to Vanderbilt's competitors. So that's not even half. He sends most of his patients to Vanderbilt. But the second line in the top there, you see the non-Vandy patients, that is 1,200. So we have this provider who does not mind sending people to Vanderbilt, and he has 1,200 more who he could be sending there. So my recommendation, if you're just looking to gather more individual patients, individual transactions, somebody like Adam Prudoff would be the person that you're going to approach. And that is the end of what I was going to say here. So I think Alucci is going to wrap some stuff up for us.
Indeed. Thank you guys so much. So we've presented you guys with a whole lot. So my goal here will just be kind of highlight again or reiterate some of the interesting and important findings that we've had, and then at the end transition into our further analysis kind of tab to just leave you guys with some additional considerations. So at first glance, Vandy has the majority of referrals overall. And we see that HCA leads when it comes to, for instance, physician's assistants, family medicine doctors. And we wondered, why might this be the case? And we showed that this likely reflects relationships that exist between certain providers and preferred facilities based on location and proximity, as Armel and Kadir had shown. Maeva showed us too that internal medicine and family medicine providers do the bulk of referring to different facilities. And Matt and Taylor kind of showed us how small of a market share Vanderbilt has when it comes to family medicine broadly and sometimes different specialties like cardiovascular disease and nephrology within internal medicine. And so from there, Alvin kind of had given us an idea of other opportunities for pursuit in addition to, or alongside the ones that we just talked about, as well as like PAs being an opportunity for growth for the Vanderbilt University Lebanon Medical Center. And Stan and Matt P's graphs kind of showed us potential providers to kind of approach, as we jokingly called the hit list, with the tree maps that they had provided. And so one of the caveats we wanted to say is that, as Matt had shared, this is not the full market. There's still a lot of missing data. And so that's something to consider that we've typed up in the further analyses section. If you don't mind navigating that way, Alexa, thank you. down at the bottom there. And so bringing in non-Medicare data would be helpful for that. Looking at hospital bed capacity and those kind of things would be valuable to consider. And then one final thought to think about or consideration is something that Tony brought up when he was doing his analyses. He mentioned whether or not, kind of just as we think about from a business perspective, whether or not hospitals have the capacity to go after patients who are being referred by certain specialties. But one thing to consider is quality of care, which I know is something that had come up in our initial conversation when you guys were talking to us about this. It's just, and it's hard to measure here, but as the numbers of patients and referrals that you guys are receiving goes up, sometimes then wait times and availabilities can, whether it's ranging from 1 to 3 months already for some specialties, those can increase along with the referrals that come along and for patients. And so you want to consider how this business pursuit might impact the quality of care for patients overall, and kind of weigh those two things and bring that tension or kind of reconcile that tension as you guys continue to expand. But I think now might be a good time to open up for Q&A, and just if anybody else, I know overall there's been a lot of contributions so far, but if there's anything that had been left out that might be valuable to address in the Q&A, we just encourage everybody's work to come through for that. So thank you guys for listening.
Can I just stop and acknowledge how effing incredible this entire thing is?
Yeah, for real.
Like, holy crap. I just like you guys blew this out of the freaking water. This is outstanding. I'm speechless. Absolutely incredible. I've got like pages and pages of just, yeah, praise for specific things, and I wanted to call out.
I wish we could have recorded it.
It looks like it is, hopefully, because there's definitely some people I would like to share this with.
Michael, too,
yeah.
I just point out too that this was in 2 weeks. Don't forget.
Yeah, exactly. Like, wow. It took us months just to like, get this data figured out the first time, like anything understood. You guys have gone far, far, far beyond ways we've looked at this. So like, I've just got nothing but extreme praise for every single person. I'm in love with this. So sorry, I don't want to gush too much, but this really is like,
no, gush away.
One of the best presentations I've ever seen. And Alexa and Alucci, you two, like Alexa, I've never seen anybody remotely pilot someone else's presentation. And it actually looks
really
seamless.
Good at poking buttons. Thank you.
Oh no, I mean, honestly, like that's honestly something I've never seen anybody do well before. That's spectacular. And Alucci for just being the Sherpa to run everybody through everything. That's a helpful, like, rarely done in presentations. I appreciate that. Like,
thank you. That was also Veronica's doing, so thank you.
Tossing between 20 or so different people and it being as seamless as it was, just outstanding. I have so many notes. Just like really, I mean, just overall, really outstanding understanding of the data from everyone. I mean, just you guys know what's in here and know what's important and know what isn't, know the clever ways to look at things. I mean, the ways to, just to call out just a handful of things, like the excluding the hospitalist like doctors. I thought that was really clever approach, because we've definitely struggled with that. Distribution of patients by the different hospitals. Gosh, I'm forgetting all the others. There's so many good ones. So I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch this. Really good.
A link to the Google site that I put in the chat. So it's like a public site that y'all can share and everything.
Yes, we'll absolutely be bookmarking that. Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, talking about, kind of piggybacking on that, I mean, thinking about COVID and how that would affect like the pulmonary disease doctors down the road, and like that being a specialty to target because of that. I never would have thought of that. I mean, it's genius. And then, yeah, also thinking about specialties that might already be maxed out at Vandy. And so thinking about other specialties that they have room for growth in. Yeah, you guys are just thinking like way outside the box. So yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah, and one of the last things that escapes me who was showing through that, but the doctors who refer partly to Vanderbilt and partly to others, and I think the specific one you pulled up was based on the address, looked like a doctor who probably works at a Vanderbilt clinic. Like that TVC is like the Vanderbilt clinic address. But what you guys have uncovered here is actually a pretty significant business that people are already doing. Hospitals love to see these doctors. They call it leakage is the way they typically think about it. It's what are the doctors that are within my system that are referring out of my system? And that's not always necessarily a bad thing, right? If a hospital doesn't have good capability in a particular area, of course, they're going to go to the best. They want those patients to go to the place where they'll get the best care. But a lot of times, you can treat those patients within the system. So there are large consulting businesses that exist largely to find those types of doctors and show them to hospitals so they can go and outreach to them. So you guys kind of identify that was a problem and found it, and found a way to identify those in 2 weeks. It's outstanding. And that's just one example. There were a dozen others just as insightful. So outstanding. Really true. I've got a couple of just like interesting questions. I was just interested. I just wrote down. What tools were you guys using here? Is this I see it's on a Google site. What is this built in?
So Google Sites are really nice because you can embed like HTML, you can embed to other websites. And so that helped with us keeping like the interactivity with a lot of our Plotly. So yeah, this whole thing is a Google site. And then I think pretty much every graph was then built with Plotly.
Excellent. It looks amazing. So whoever just built the presentation design, kudos.
That would be Alexa.
Well, good job, Alexa. The question, I think one of the early ones I was just curious about, and I guess looking right here, where did you find the number of hospital beds and how did you connect that to the data?
That might have been Taylor had found, yes, this resource here.
Mm-hmm. So yes, this is a very good one. I like this one. Now, this one, at least that you were looking at, does not have NPIs. So what did you guys do to make that connection?
So I actually just created manually a dictionary of all the hospitals that we were looking at and the number of beds, and then just mapped it to include it into the data set we were working with.
Makes sense. Sometimes the direct approach is the best one we found, especially with a lot of these. So great find. This is a great website. It has a lot of really good detailed information. And actually, if you click into one of those, you guys might have seen this. There is the CCNs, which is I think something we maybe briefly touched on last week. This is actually one of the few sites I've ever seen where you can actually find the CCNs for the hospital and potentially use them to connect to the NPIs. And I don't really know how they do it. Maybe they manually keep it up, but so very useful site. It's a great area. On the number of referrals, which I think we hit a few different times, but maybe I specifically had the question on the geo distribution. Is that looking at, I think it was a little bit earlier in the presentation, maybe at our healthcare landscape.
In the provider communities, the part that
yeah.
presented.
Is this number of referrals, number of patients, number unique doctors? What's the
So yeah, I know it sounds like it's very low, but it's a number of patients, and it's what I got from the Louvain algorithm. So I agree it's low, but I checked my code like 5 times to make sure I was not making a mistake. And if I look at the others that was working on it, they have similar numbers. So it's just a community. So it's not the major hospitals fair community. For the first one was HCA, the second one was St. Thomas, and the third one was, the second one was Vanderbilt and St. Thomas. So that's how the algorithm works. I don't believe I made a mistake, but
oh no, I wasn't suggesting or questioning that at all.
Yeah.
No, I think it's normalized. The number is normalized when you do the clover plot.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily reflect the actual number on the key.
The specific digit is less important than the relative differences between the
it's normalized.
ones. Makes sense.
And Armel and I, we ended up working with the same data. So if hers is wrong, mine is wrong. But I also ran it with transaction count to just see if there was major variations in it, and there surprisingly was not. So I think this is probably right.
No, it makes sense. I was more just curious. More than anything.
I think if I remember, it's a quartile or something. It's normalized usually when you plot chloroplot. Yeah, so it's not actual number, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think part of what you guys are seeing here is these are probably 10 zip codes where providers are actually located in Middle Tennessee. If you're up in my zip code, which I think is somewhere in the top left there, there's maybe 1 or 2 doctors. You won't see any referrals to or from there because there's nothing there. So no, this is great. And actually really, really interesting way of looking at it. So
could I actually ask a question, y'all, in terms of and I'm sorry if I missed it in your initial presentation, but one of the things that we kept coming across was we're dealing with Medicare data, which is a particular subsection of the population in terms of demographics. So in terms of translating a lot of these insights to the general, the general healthcare market in Nashville, how do they translate? I guess what are the assumptions that you make in doing that?
It's a great question. So here's kind of the approach we typically take with it. Medicare has some big gaps. So there are certain specialties that simply don't see a lot of Medicare patients. Not a lot of babies, not a lot of pediatricians taking Medicare. Otolaryngology, which is just ENT, ear, nose, and throat. I don't know why they go with that horribly complex name, but they do. They mostly see younger patients, typically. So you're going to see a lot fewer of those specialties in your data. And the doctors that you do see are probably seeing maybe a more specific set of patients. So what you learn in those specialties probably isn't incredibly helpful when applied to the rest of the commercial population. But generally speaking, especially when you're thinking about things like this particular question, where do doctors refer? I think that referral behavior typically doesn't change based on the insurance that you have. So if you're a 64-year-old coming to see your doctor because you have heart trouble, you are very likely to get the exact same referral as if you were a 66-year-old. So we typically treat those two, at least when we think the patient populations are approximately similar. There's no specific reason to think that the referrals would change. We would treat those as approximately similar. Now, if you're looking at something else, like what types of procedure, if you're looking at Medicare to determine what types of procedures a doctor would do on a typical patient in a year, obviously Medicare is probably not a great proxy for your non-Medicare patients. right? Medicare patients, because they're older, are going to have a whole host of issues that your typical healthy 30-year-old just won't necessarily have. So it depends on the question you're asking. But I would say in these particular types of questions, just when you see the doctor, where do you go next? I would consider those to be very, very similar between Medicare and non-Medicare.
Great, thank you for explaining the logic behind that. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I did want to ask, you mentioned a few times, I think in this one, am I saying this right, the Louvain community algorithm?
Right.
Would somebody be able to explain, I'm unfamiliar with that, would somebody be able to kind of explain what that's like, kind of how that's working, maybe dig a little bit behind the curtain?
So I think Michael can, oh, okay. Probably we are the students who need to explain this. So basically it's a clustering algorithm. So it takes into account the connections in terms of the length of paths, centrality of the those paths together to create a community. So basically, who is more connected to providers who are more connected to each other will be put into the same community compared to far away connected, like community connected through 3-4 layers of connection versus shorter paths are connected together.
Do you set like the number of groupings manually, or does it like auto group?
No, this is actually it's a repeated generation, so it starts randomly and build from there. First it creates like random numbers, and then iteratively build those closest together communities. It's a repetitive process to cluster those numbers to get communities together.
That's really interesting, a wonderful application. That's a very, very deep way of thinking about the problem. That's just, this is the perfect application to it and well executed. I'd say like it, just scrolling up, I think was the, yeah, this one, you know, immediately tells me that you guys have done this right, because so much of the connections that are between hospitals, you know, Vanderbilt and Williamson, they actually do have a really strong connection. They're not owned by the same place, but Williamson has a, I think, a strong affiliation with Vanderbilt.
Yeah, right.
It makes sense that they share a lot of patients, and that they wouldn't necessarily have a lot of doctors who are referring outside that network. A lot of reasons why that makes sense. The you know, the Nashville ones sharing a cluster of patients pretty closely to each other, again, also makes sense. Murray being kind of unique and on its own, with a little bit of a connection, I think, to Vanderbilt, because I think, again, there's some, I'm not sure if it's official or unofficial, but there is a bit of a relationship there.
Yeah, I think Vanderbilt has this connection with all rural hospitals in terms of, especially in terms of cardiovascular specialty, where Vanderbilt trains the rural hospital in terms of sustaining the patient till the flight come in and pick them up to the Vanderbilt.
Yeah. See, that's another example of how well you guys understand not just the data, but all the stuff surrounding the data. Because I didn't know that, and the fact that you just had that, it's spectacular. Really good.
That's because I work at Vanderbilt.
I mean, hey, you take the things you know and you apply with this. It's yeah, excellent.
Probably I'm giving away the business model.
Yeah. Gosh, I don't think I had any other deep questions. I mean, you guys ran through this all so smoothly. I think most of the questions I had ended up getting answered pretty much immediately. So another mark of a very well thought out and prepared and executed presentation. So I don't know that I have any other questions, although if you guys have any questions like that Medicare one, that's stuff that didn't make sense, I'm happy to try to explain, but honestly, looking at this, you guys may be better able to educate me than vice versa.
Something I would just like to call out is that Veronica, Alucci, and Alvin spent like multiple nights creating this narrative and just like thinking through everything. So I think even though like I know Veronica and Alvin didn't talk as much, but like they're a lot of the backbone of this.
It shows that there was really wonderful care put into how this flows. I mean, like I know I said this, but I really want to reiterate it. This is actually one of the most spectacular presentations I've maybe ever seen. I mean, notwithstanding just the fact that you took this incredibly complex data set and distilled it down into a really good narrative, just even looking at the narrative itself is really well executed. To do that with complicated data like this, 2 weeks. I mean, I'm still like, are we sure it's been 2 weeks? Are we sure it hasn't been a year? Like,
I think we all feel the same way.
Oh, excellent job. I mean, for all the obvious work and care that was put into this, really shows just outstanding.
Right. Well, you did give us a really good introduction to the field that we'd be working in. I'd say that was a big part of it, was how well you all brought us the data sets and gave us a lot of confidence and a lot of insight. So
I appreciate that, but you guys have done all the work here. This is not an easy data set to work with, as you all know very intimately by this point. I just can't get the smile off my face. It's amazing. Really good stuff.
So much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael and Charles, for coming and helping provide your expertise, get the project off to a good start, and just spending some time with us and giving the students some feedback.
Yeah, and do y'all mind if I share this with some people? I know probably half dozen people who would love this presentation.
Please do. Yes.
Any objections?
No, we put so much work in this. Please have more people look at it.
Yes.
We'll also be adding the GitHub repos and stuff like that. That's the in progress references page, but we'll be adding the GitHub repos and code, so it'll be hopefully clear what data set exactly we're using, how we curated it, and then replicable as well.
And then also how we built some of the plots, because I know fellow coding geeks might also be interested in that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, yeah, wonderful job. I intend to share this far and wide. So
great,
good stuff.
Yeah, everybody, let's thank Michael and Charles, and you all take care.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thank you guys.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
and,
guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Michael, as soon as this is available, share it with me. I will. I've got a few people who are on the on speed dial for this.
Yeah, definitely. I'll send the URL and I'll send the recording.
Awesome. Thank y'all. Really appreciate it.